Thanks again for the pictures.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the loading bay and to this event, which is how to get published. It's very good of you to come on your Sunday morning and in the rain as well. The idea of this really is the journey into publication can be a daunting one, it can be a difficult one. It's a very competitive world out there, and the idea of this panel is to demystify that, to offer you advice from industry experts, from published authors, from agents, from editors. We'll be talking for about 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes. We'll then open the floor to questions. So do have questions prepared. If you don't feel confident enough to ask questions in a public forum like this, we'll be hanging around afterwards, I think most of us, to network and to socialise. So do come and grab us if you want to. So I'm going to introduce the panel, but I'll introduce myself first of all, and then I'll introduce the panel. So my name is Michael Stewart, and I'm a writer. I've been writing for a long time, over 30 years. I began in theatre, and then I went into radio and TV, but I've been writing books for about 15 years. I'm also, I've been teaching writing for many years. I was head of creative writing at Huddersfield Uni for 18 years. I've also been a publisher, I've been an editor. I now run something called the Bronte Writing Centre in Haworth. We run courses and mentorship for writers. We specialise in the journey to publication. Our latest course, I brought some leaflets, it's called How to Write a Novel and Get Published, so very much on message. I do have some leaflets if you're interested. It's running in September as an online course and as a face-to-face course as well. So hang around at the end and I'll give some leaflets out. Also just gone live, in fact, this weekend is next year's schedule. So if you go online, you can see that. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the panel. I'm going to start with, we'll do it in the order I think that we've got. So I'll start with Denai. This is Denai. Denai is an editor with Murky Books and Cornerstone Press, which are imprints of Penguin Random House. They were hosting this event. She currently runs the Murky Books Prize along with the rest of the Murky team, and hopefully you'll tell us a bit more about that. Although she primarily acquires in non-fiction, she also has experience of literary fiction publishing. And this year, she's worked with authors such as Rivers Solomon, Drew Afawalo, Adrian Adami, to name a few, and is currently working on a project to revive forgotten but classic works. I'm intrigued by that, by authors from the global majority, and she's really looking forward to publishing a moving literary memoir about black matriarchy next year. So that's our editor. Our author is Amit. You may know him as A.A. Dand. So Amit was raised in Bradford, spent his youth observing the city from behind the counter of a small convenience store. After qualifying as a pharmacist, he worked in London and travelled extensively before returning to Bradford to start his own business and begin writing. The history, diversity and darkness of the city have inspired his Harry Verdi novels, one of which has been turned into a 6-part BBC drama recently. You may have seen that. The first novel by a British Asian to do so. In 2025, his latest novel, The Chemist, became an instant Sunday Times top 10 bestseller. He's currently working on several production companies on new screen projects, which I'm sure he'll tell us about shortly. Finally, Kerry-Ann. Kerry-Ann Bentley is the founder and literary agent of KAB Literary Limited, where she represents the estate of Alex Wheatle, Yvonne Bailey-Smith, Dominique Palmer, Jackson King, and many more. KAB Literary represents global writers and diverse narratives with international appeal. She started the New York office of Janclo and Nesbitt, where she worked with writers such as Ursa Daly Ward, Mason Coyle, Alison P. Davis, and many more. She joined TGLA in 2023 and founded KABL in February. So that's our panel, our illustrious panel. I'm going to start with Amit, I think. So just, and I always say this, it's always worth aspiring writers to hear the journey into publication from as many different writers as possible, because I think we all have different journeys into publication. Do you want to just sort of break down where you began as a writer and how you found your way into publication?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think I'm really pleased to see very many South Asian faces in the audience today. I think when I first started writing and I went to seminars like this, I was literally the only person, so I'm already really pleased and excited about that. My journey into publication was a long one. As you mentioned, I became a pharmacist and did the Asian thing, go and get a doctor, pharmacist, dentist, whatever. So I did that because I was brought up in a white working class area behind a corner shop, and we weren't affluent, and I wanted to raise my family out of just sort of a job that would provide a future. So I did that, and I enjoyed it. Okay, I wanted to be a pharmacist, but I had this secret passion of reading and writing, and I forgot all about it when I was at university. And in 2006, having been a pharmacist for 4 years, I thought, I'm going to give this a try. And the reason I wanted to do it was because I'd read a book by an author called Tess Gerritsen, and it was a great book called The Surgeon. And I researched Tess, and she was of Chinese origin, lived in America, and was a GP. And I thought, well, hang on, she's a GP, she's a doctor, and she's become an author. Well, if she can do it, maybe a pharmacist can do it. So I started my journey in 2006. Was met with a lot of negativity because I wrote my first novel. It took me a year, and I tried to get an agent, and I couldn't get one for love nor money, because everything that they said to me was a brown guy writing crime fiction. They were like, it doesn't exist, and it didn't exist. They were like, in the Western world, in publishing, there isn't a single brown person who writes commercial crime fiction. It can't be done. Brown people write wonderful works of literary fiction that win Man Booker Prizes, but they don't write crime. So I started, and it took me 10 years and 3 different agents till I found the one that said, I think you've got something interesting. And I failed forward a lot, and I'm a big believer in failing forward. So every 100,000 words that I wrote got me slightly closer to the final 85,000 that would become the Harry Verdi series. And it was about, I attended seminars like this, lots of them. If there was any opportunity to go and hear authors speaking, I would go and try, and I would always learn a few little clues, a few little nuggets I would go home and write them down, about how to write, when to write, how to fail forward. I would say that from 2010 to 13 was probably my darkest moment when I wanted to quit, because I'd left my literary agency, and they were a huge literary agency in London. And I'd left, and I had no agent, and I was really, really down with it. But then I went to a Faber Academy session in London about how to get an agent, and I started learning again because the world had changed since 2006. We now had the internet, we had email submissions. It was slightly quicker than writing letters, which is what I used to do, and send them out. So I then found an agent who believed in the vision that I had. I had failed a lot because I'd written the Harry Verdi novels originally. Harry was an alcoholic, womanizer, lived in a pub. Because all the crime fiction novels that I had read with white heroes, the guy was a womanizer, an alcoholic, and lived in a pub. Now, I don't know anything about that world. I don't drink. I know lots about the pubs in Bradford because I used to go around with my dad, and we used to play snooker in the home. But I didn't understand the world, so Harry Verdi felt like a caricature. It didn't feel believable. And only when I completely ignored that and wrote what I knew him to be, and wrote him truthfully and authentically, and I made him exactly who I wanted him to be, and I didn't care about the fact that it hadn't ever been done before, I got published. So that was my journey into getting Harry Verdi.
And I guess those 10 years in the wilderness, you were learning your craft, really.
I was learning my craft. I mean, I did things which, now I would say don't do this, but I found a retired editor who had edited some really huge international best-selling authors, and I paid her £2,000 to edit my book. And I'd had private sessions with her when I was because I really believed in The Blood Divide, which is the first book I ever wrote. But it's the last one I ever published with Penguin, but it was the first one I ever wrote. And then I had private sessions with her. I paid the literary consultancy £1,500 to give me a critique of another book. I found I really spent quite a lot of money trying to figure out why this book wasn't working. And can I tell you that The Blood Divide that got published is the same book that I wrote in 2010. I didn't edit it according to what any of those people said. Because again, and I mean this with all due respect, but there were white, very well-to-do, high-class editors who didn't have a clue about the world that I was writing about. Because The Blood Divide is a third in Bradford and 2/3 in India. It's a race across the Indian continent. And it talks about history and, the darkness that empire had. So for them, empire was a romanticized way of looking at the world. I was giving empire a real kicking in my book because I was talking about death, murder, victimization. So I paid a lot of money to try and do that, really believing in the product, but the feedback I was getting didn't match where I wanted to take the book because they wanted me to dial it down.
Dial it down in what way?
Just make it a bit more vanilla, just make it something that they could relate to, so that they could read it and think, oh yes, this is a bit Lee Child, or this is a bit Tess Gerritsen, or this is a bit Val McDermid. I don't do any of that stuff. I just wanted to. I was writing for me in that instance. I wasn't writing for the market, and I didn't want to write for the market. I wanted to write for me. And I never moved away from that, which is probably why it took me a lot longer to get published. Because had I taken on board some of those comments, I wonder what my journey would have looked like. But I didn't yield in the way that they wanted me to.
But you were learning your craft, though. And what kind of things were you learning, though? That if you look back at those early scripts, what's changed in terms of your writing style, your writing abilities?
Quicker, pacier. I mean, I think that's my thing, pace. I want you to read if you're still reading my book 10 days after starting it, I'm really disappointed. I've lost.
And do you write quickly? Is that pace reflected in the...
Yeah, I write all my books in 4 to 6 weeks of chaos. I don't advise it. It's just the way that I do it. I think about it for 9 months, don't get me wrong. And I build it in my brain. I build the entire thing in my brain. I always know the beginning. I always know the end. I know nothing else. And so what happens is, and it's specifically to me, because this is how my brain works, is that my brain will be full of noise. It's the book. And I'll get to a point where I'm so terrified that I'm going to forget something now because my brain is overwhelmed and it's bursting, that I need to write. And it just pours out from my brain onto the page. And I have to write quickly because I'm terrified I'll forget something. And so it is 4 to 6 weeks of absolute chaos of writing it. And then the second draft is where the magic happens, because the first draft doesn't mean anything. I will write. I mean, I'm doing it in a minute.
Are you a rewriter, or what's your preference? Do you like the creative act of getting the first draft down, or do you prefer to go in when you've got something and rewrite?
My rewrites aren't heavy. They're more about order, because I don't write in sequence. So I always write the end first. So at the moment, if you looked at my current work in progress, I've got chapter 1 to 25. 25 to 50 is dead. There's nothing there. And then 50 to 100 is done. Because I have seen, all my novels are scenes, so I have a scene in my head where I know that Idris Khan, who's the pharmacist, who's the chemist, I know that he's going to have a scene where he goes into a certain place and gets certain information out of this guy. I know that that's going to happen in the book, so I'll write it. I know there's a scene where he needs to engage somebody to get some information out of them and bribe them or drug them or whatever. I will write that scene. So I will create lots of scenes, and I know they're all going to be in the book. I don't know where they're going to go. So I'll always, and I've done this all the way, I write the first 10 to 15, so that's my beginning. I've set myself up. And then I just start writing all these scenes, and then I start gelling them together, and somehow it works. That's all I can tell you. Because I find it very difficult to write A to Z, because what will happen is I'll get stuck, and I've done this before. I'll get stuck at chapter 15, always happens at 15 for some reason. Then I might spend months thinking, what the hell is 16 going to be? Well, that's a complete waste of time, because I know what 50 is going to be, 60 is going to be, 70 is going to be. I know there's all these scenes that have to be written. And by the time I've written all of those, I've figured out what 15 is, what chapter 16 is. So I think it's about momentum. It's about continuing to write. Because I know, and I did this for 10 years when I wasn't published, is the minute I stop, I'm done. Because I will procrastinate like there is no procrastination. I've got a PhD, first class honours in procrastination, okay? I could waste weeks and weeks doing the most irrelevant task than go and write that chapter. And I'm terrified of that happening because I've done it sometimes before. So your process is your process. It's whatever works for you.
And you've recently gone full-time as a writer. I know up till fairly recently you were still working as a pharmacist.
Yeah.
How's that transition?
Difficult.
Have you been more productive, less productive, the same? What's
less productive.
Less productive. Because that's
yeah.
I think that's a common fallacy, isn't it? Well, if you've got more time, you'll be more productive. And I think very often the opposite happens, in fact.
Yeah, no, I had a very disciplined way of writing, which was 9 p.m. till 1 a.m. I wrote all the Harry Verdi books in that way. And now I've got all the time in the world. And because you've got all the time in the world, you think, tomorrow, this afternoon, tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. So I think I think I will go back to work because it gives me discipline and structure. Those are things that I miss.
Yeah. In terms of this, the Verdi TV adaptation, and it's the third novel, isn't it, you've adapted?
Third, yes, I
Yeah.
didn't manage to do it with the first one.
So talk us through that process then, because it's unusual, first of all, if you don't have TV experience, to adapt your own work. That's quite unusual in the industry. Technically, a script is obviously very different to a novel. It's structured in a much tighter way. You know, all the things about, beats and structure is so important to a script. So how did you, first of all, convince the BBC to allow you to adapt your own work? And secondly, how did you find it? How did you teach yourself how to write a TV script?
Yeah, I mean, it was fortuitous. I sold the TV rights, and the production company said, "Do you know how to write a script?" And I was like, "Of course I know how to write a script." And they were like, "Can you do it in 8 weeks?" And I was like, "Of course I can do it in 8 weeks." I'd never written a script before in my life, and knew nothing about it. Came out, told my agent, and he was like, "What the hell have you just done?" I said, "You tell me if somebody asks you how to do something in a meeting, always say yes." He was like, "Yeah, sometimes you should say no." But also, there weren't any South Asian screenwriters for crime. That literally, there weren't any. So if you're going to take a punt on anyone, take a punt on me. So I just did it as a condition of sale in the end, because I knew that I'd got my foot in the door. Then they started to go into, actually, he's never done this before, he can't do this. But because they desperately wanted the deal, I said, my condition of sale is that I'm writing it, because it was competitive.
Did you have a mentor, though? Did you have someone who guided you through the process?
No, I just started reading loads of scripts. I stopped reading books and I started reading scripts. And I read a lot of scripts, a lot of them, a lot. I was reading 10 scripts a week. And then I started breaking them down. Shame I haven't got my computer here with me. I could show you. I broke down Luther versus Happy Valley. I'm a spreadsheet geek. I love spreadsheets. Oh my God, Mr. Spreadsheet. So I broke all the scenes down. So it was like, this is the scene. This is what happens. This is how long the scene is. And these are the characters that are in that scene. And then I color coordinated them all. And I printed them off on huge A1 pieces of paper and stuck them on my wall and just looked at them. And they're very pretty. And I kept looking at them thinking, how do these guys break up the structure of this? So I just failed forward. So
you didn't say, for example, look at Robert McKee's story or any of the kind of Bibles in the industry?
I tried, but they bored me. I got bored with it because I'm very impatient.
Yeah. And what insights do you have then? So having done that and taught yourself how to do that, what would you say the main distinctions are between writing a novel and a script?
The main distinctions is that a script, you are telling stories in pictures. Great screenwriting, if you can mute the volume and still understand what's going on, that's great screenwriting. Because I am literally telling you stories in pictures. That is the screenwriter's job. The novel's job is the complete opposite. I have to tell you everything. I can't tell you in pictures because you're not watching anything. I have to cerebrally tell you the story in words. But on screen, I'm telling you stories in pictures. In novels, I'm telling you stories in words, and that is the absolute distinction between them. If you can watch a TV show on mute and still understand what is going on, it's great screenwriting. And that's how I did it. I watched black and white movies, no sound. And I was amazed. I was like, oh my God. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but if you've watched a black and white movie, because I've never watched a black and white movie, I'm from the era of colour television. You watch a black and white movie and I'm like, how on earth is this entertaining me? Because it is superb screenwriting. What a great way to learn.
Because I found, when I worked for TV, I found the biggest distinction really was craft. You know, a script is so tight in comparison to a novel. You know, each scene has to end with a beat. You know, each the 3-act structure, the 5-act structure that's in place in almost all scripts. It's very hard to do that successfully without learning the craft. You know, there are very few examples that don't do that. In terms of where you're going next then, because I know you're working on something and you've got a very short deadline, haven't you? You've got about 2 or 3 weeks or something?
Yeah, I've got a book due at the end of this month, The Kingpin, which is the second book of The Chemist. And I've got 2 or 3 production companies. I'm working with them on screen stuff.
Yeah. Is this still Harry Verdi or is this?
No, I've got The Chemist in with a production company, The Blood Divide, which we talked about earlier, in with a production company, and another show in with the BBC. So, listen, I'm a hustler. I need 5, 6, 7, 8 projects on the go. I know I'm going to be rejected. I'm fully comfortable with being rejected now. I believe in failing forward. You know, every no that you get, for everybody in the room, yeses only come out of lots of no's. You know, there's a circle, right? And it's jammed fact full of no's, and the circle's about to burst. It's like a balloon because you can't get any more no's in there. And then it pops, and a huge yes comes out of it because yeses only come from lots of no's.
In terms of the role of the agent then in your career, talk about really, it'd be interesting to see your, well, first of all, how that's been, how you work with your agent, because I know when we're going to turn to Kerry-Ann shortly, some agents are more hands-on, more editorial, others less so. How have is it the same agent you've had all the way through? Or
No, I'm on my third agent now. So my first agent was extremely hands-on, dissect the manuscript, in-house editor, extremely labour-intensive, and I did that for 4 years, and it killed me. Again, right, it was the wrong agent. It was a fantastic literary agency, one of the best in the world, but it wasn't right for me because it was trying to make me into something I'm not. And my second agent didn't do edit editorial at all. He simply read the book and went, I think this is commercial, and I'm going to sell it. And my third agent is like that as well at the minute. So I personally don't like too much. I like my editorial when I get to publishing, when they get to the publisher, because they're going to print the book. But I find that if I spend so much time editing it, by the time it gets to the publisher, I'm burned out. I'm edited out. For me,
I guess the danger of that as well is if you and the editor, the agent work very closely on edits, and then you sell it to a publisher, the editor may have a different vision.
Well, precisely. You know. So, but I mean, and it's not right. There's no right or wrong way about this. I just, when I went to my latest agents, I just said, look, my preference is that you don't over-edit me, because by the time it gets to the editor, it's dead. I believe, I've always said this, I believe that a novel is like a date, right? So when you first meet somebody, it's always wonderful, the chemistry is good, it's exciting, first dates, and then after like 10 years and you're married, it's just like, oh my God, I can't stand the way you breathe. Like, I want to, And the thing with a novel is the same. Those first few drafts are exciting. It's chemistry. I'm basically in a relationship with the novel, and it's so exciting because I don't know what it's going to feel like or be like or do. But if I'm still editing it after like 2 years, I hate it. I hate the words on the page. I feel ill looking at it. Like I want to smash it. I want to throw it out the way. I want to burn it to death. So I know that there's a window where the chemistry and the magic is going to happen. Now, if my agent, and I said this very specifically, I said, if you over-edit me, I'll be dead by the time I get to the publisher. And even though the edits might be really sensible and great, the date has gone. It's now a marriage and it's divorce. So that's the way that I sold it to him. And it just works for me. Some of my other friends, and Kerry-Ann can talk more about this, they are extremely edited in a lot of detail by their agents, and they love that because it gives them the confidence to go to. I think it just depends on the author. You have a conversation with your agent.
So, Kerry-Ann, I think before we get into this discussion, really, about whether you're an editor or essentially somebody who sells the packages, it is. Do you want to just sort of describe the role of an agent first of all? Because not all writers have agents; most do. Pros and cons, I guess, really, and how you got into being an agent, really, and what the day-to-day of an agent's working life looks like, I guess.
Oh my God, I want to know this as well.
Many writers do. They always want to know why we don't respond to emails quickly. So I got my start in agenting when I was living in the US. A teacher who is a writer put me in contact with her agent, and I got an incredible internship in Manhattan where I learned the ropes of what an agent is. And it is a job where you have to wear many different hats. But in very simple terms, as Amit would explain, you work with a writer very closely. You represent them in the way that a music manager would represent a musician, a talent agent would represent an actor. Agents make their money by selling their writers, their clients' books. And it is a creative collaboration. The writer is the artist who does the fun creative stuff, even though it's not all fun. Writing is very, very hard, and that's why I'm happy I don't do it. An agent is the person who has the business now, so they know what's working in the market, and they should have a broad network contacts on the editorial side and the publishing side, so that when they do come across a project, an author whose work they believe in, they should have a good idea of who they can send it to, who would also be good to join the agent author team. And the most important bit, I think, for an author, the most value, is when that author does get a book deal, they get an offer from a publisher, and then they have a book contract. And you can get more into this later about who, if an agent is needed. Lots of writers have careers and lots of people have published books without an agent. But you will see a stark difference in those contracts versus the writer who did have an agent. Essentially, the writer's work is their IP, and there's many intellectual property, and there are many. A good agent breaks down that IP so that they can sell it in different formats, different territories. So you have the print, which is the book that you sell to the publisher, but you would also have the audio tape that would come out with Audible or WF House. You have the film and TV rights. You also have translation rights. And basically, the authors remunerated through royalties and their advance, and a percentage always goes to the publisher and the percentage goes to the author. And as an agent, what you want is for that contract to be the most meaningful to the author. That's how they have a career. That's how they can eventually go full time. And then the other role after a book deal has been signed is kind of navigating the author through the rest of the publishing journey, which I think is probably the most opaque part of the journey for a writer when it comes to doing publicity, marketing. An agent should be able to explain the process, that not everybody gets a Sally Rooney or Zadie Smith budget for their markets. Not everyone's going to be advertised all across London. There's going to be a different from a quiet debut who might go to a couple local bookstores from where that author's from, get publicity, then, a tour around the UK or even internationally. And then in terms of working with the writer as well, I do find that now more and more agents do have to be more editorially involved. So you do have to have a lot of editing skills. And at the point where a writer meets an agent is when they consider their work, their manuscript done, and they're looking for representation, and they will start their querying journey, which is, from what I hear of writers, not a great place to be in. It's called the trenches. It can be weeks, it can be months, it can be years, and that's because it's incredibly competitive, and each agent and what they are looking for is incredibly different. Yes, generally, every agent wants a book that and a writer that is working in the market, but people also have specialties. They have a specialist list. Some people do pure literary fiction, some people only do nonfiction, some people do children's, and that's why it's really, really important as a writer that you take your time when you are choosing your agent, because, as you've had 3, it is a chemistry test, but it's also about longevity, and you really have to, as a writer, you have to really trust your agent, that they believe in your work, that they're going to invest in your work, that they know about the industry and what you're trying to do to successfully pitch and sell your book. And from the agent side, they want an author who also does understand how the industry works, is patient, and who also is a writer that wants a career. It's not a good business plan for an agent, take on a writer who only has one book in them. And, that can be the difference between a writer who has writing as a hobby and one who's able to make a living off of it.
Are you hands-on? When you say you've taught yourself editing, how closely do you work with the writers and how much editing do you do?
Yes, so I am a very editorially involved agent, I think, because I'm a newer agent as well, and so I mainly working with debut authors, and some authors I've taken on just the partial, because the heart of the story was beating on the page, the writing was good, and they probably need some help in terms of Most of the editing I do is structural. I don't like to work with writers who don't know how to write, who don't know how to use commas and semicolons and how to structure a good sentence. There are lots of agents who will work with that because some of those writers are really commercial and are writing exactly into the market. But the editorial I do with my authors is mainly structural, developmental, working on, is this the right decision for the character? Is this the right way to reveal this information to the reader? So everything should already be there. It just needs some refining, some finessing, and some writers they take on are just further ahead than others. And so I've been working with some writers on for like less than a year, some for more than a year, and that's all dependent on where an agent is. I do have quite a robust list, but I've been able to take on writers that have quite a need for larger editorial support, just because I don't have a huge backlist of authors as of yet who are taking up my time. But every agent's different. You know, your agent probably does not have that time at all because he's quite, he's the director of a company and he's like a vet in the industry. So he's probably looking to work with writers who they submit to him, he reads the manuscript and they can be on submission in 3 to 6 months. Whereas I'm at a stage where I can take a little bit longer. And that's why as a writer, you really need to take your time and get the widest pool of agents. Don't go for, Sally Rooney's agent or Zadie Smith's agent right off the bat. They're going to be like incredibly busy with their pre-existing list and probably taking on debut writers less, whereas someone who is a junior agent, an assistant agent, or newly started as an independent agent like me, they have a different capacity. Yeah.
And what are you looking for? What gets you excited then when that email lands? What kind of things, are irresistible for you as an agent?
Yeah, I think everyone would say, a good query letter, which is when the writer is querying agents and they kind of have a submission package, is what we call it. It will be a querying letter. It will have a sample of the writing. That's different for every agent, each agency. You need to check their website, check what their submission guidelines are. Some people want 10 pages of your manuscript. Some people want the first 50 pages. Some people want 10,000 words. And you have to check. And also a synopsis, which is usually 1 page. That's usually what's included when people are emailing agents. And what makes a really successful pitch, I think it's 3 main things. It is obviously you want to begin with the hook of what your book is. So an elevator pitch, which is a term which comes from when, I think it was like Silicon Valley or Hollywood, when you are a budding creative and you get in an elevator with, the top executive and you have the duration of that lift journey to tell them what you're working on and why they should be interested. And a covering letter, a pitch letter to an agent works in the same way. So, did you know how to pitch? How would you pitch the chemist in like your elevator pitch?
My elevator pitch was 1 line because my agent called me and my subject matter said Dexter meets Breaking Bad. That was it.
Perfect.
Comp titles, it's worth probably talking about comp titles,
comp
isn't it?
titles.
Because agents, not all agents like comp titles, but most do,
I
don't
think
they?
most do. And what we mean by comparative titles. So you said Breaking Bad, Dexter. So from that, I could get definitely crime, maybe murder and serial killer, police procedural, but also something to do with science and drugs.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Call the chemist,
So that is what you want to be able to do when in your first few sentences to an agent. Usually most agents would like 1 book comparative title. You use 2 there, which I think is fine, but a lot of people would want a book comparative. And basically that you're telling the agent that you know exactly what you're doing, you know exactly what you've written and where it's sitting in the market. So you can use a book and something non-book, film, TV show, music, sometimes video games, but you want them to be contemporary. A lot of people like to, quote, saying that their book is the next Great Expectations or the Great Gatsby. first of all, no one's going to believe you, but also those books are over 100 years old. Society has moved on. That's not exactly what's going to be working right now. And it's also, really setting yourself up for failure because you're not going to be those greats. So yeah, and you want to highlight what your unique selling point is, the hook, if it's a crime, if it's a romance, what is the story that's going to make us go, oh. And then the second paragraph should be, a combination of selling the story. It's different from a synopsis, which synopsis is like a blueprint of everything that happens in the story. It has all the characters, it has all the main plot points, it has all the resolutions. What you want to, the main part of your query letter should look a little bit like the blurb of a book that you pick up in the library or bookstore. It's got to be selling the story, not just telling the agent what happens, because especially when you get into the genre, quite a few plot points are similar, but you want us to get involved in the characters, the emotional arc. And then the final part is telling the agent about yourself, what relevant experience you have. Have you been published elsewhere? Did you do an MFA? Not so much about, you live in Chester with your cat and your dog, but more about why you wrote this book. Amit's a great example. He's written a book about a chemist who goes into crime, solves crime, and he was a pharmacist. That is going to be really exciting for an agent because, he has that experience. He knows he's going to be able to really reflect what it's like in this fictional sense, and also probably a little bit about why you've queried this specific agent. You should be querying lots of agents, but again, they're all different people, they're all different personalities. I can easily tell when someone's just copy and pasted a query letter that's gone to absolutely everyone the same, and it's just not going to resonate. And it's gone to everyone, it's not going to resonate the same with me.
I'm only laughing because I did that.
I think I did actually to begin with.
Yeah.
I think that's a very, very common mistake, and I always tell my mentees and people on my courses, to spend time researching agents, find out who they are, read about them, look at the writers that they're representing, look at those books. If they're not books that in some way connect with what you're pitching, pick the right agents basically who are interested in your genre and your subject, and spend time researching it, because once you've signed that contract, if it has to work for both of you, doesn't it? It's a relationship that has to work for the agent and the writer. And I've had 3 agents in my career, and 2 of them were unsuitable. Not bad agents, just weren't right for me, and I didn't realise that until further down the line. Had I researched more thoroughly, then I would have avoided that issue. In terms of what you don't want to see, and the kind of mistake, you've already hit on the big mistake, haven't you, really, is dear sir, madam, or, those kind of completely impersonal responses. What are the other big mistakes, you think, or the things you don't want to see in that initial approach?
Do you mean from the query letter sense, or from the manuscript?
You must get hit all the time with people, pushing something onto you, and the things that turn you off, or the things you think, no, that's the wrong way of doing this.
Yeah. So there are actually quite a few ways to mess up a query letter, to be honest, which is why you really should take the time and practice. And there are lots of forums where authors will share the query letter that got them their agent. But again, those very impersonalized, like mass email queries, they don't work. But it's also simple things, spelling the agent's name wrong, getting a query, and I get a lot of 120,000 word space operas. I've not said in my submission guidelines or what I'm looking for that I want one of those. I haven't explicitly said I don't, but if you look at my list and the books I have published, they're nowhere near a space opera set in 2055 or eco-thrillers. So again, approaching an agent with your very specific novel and they do not represent that novel, you're wasting your time, you're wasting that agent's time, and that's probably a really big mistake. Look at the book, know what book you were writing, know who's similar, go to the back of the book, find the agent's name, do an online search, and make sure your agent would actually want to represent the book that you've written. Other mistakes, overly long query letters, overly familiar, ones that have attached the entire manuscript, which is very presumptuous. But yeah, and then the other part is just what they've written is just not for you. And again, that's down to personal taste, down to what the agent's looking for, and that's really easy to avoid if you've done your due process research.
Thank you. Yeah. So, Denai, let's turn to editing now. And I think for lots of people, they perhaps don't realise there are lots of types of editing, there's different roles in editing. So, do you want to first of all talk about you as an editor, what your role is within Murky Books, but also what the other roles of editors are generally?
Yeah. So you are definitely right in pointing out that there's different types of editors. So I am what you would call a commissioning editor. And what we do is to find the trends within the market and to also be the taste makers within the market. And a lot of the times that means working with agents, but then even in fiction and nonfiction, it also means like dealing with IP as well. So if you find someone, you think they've got a book in them, you can technically do it without an agent, but you can also introduce them to an agent if they feel safer that way. So with a commissioning editor, a lot of the times you're working for a division within like a publishing industry, right? So I'm only speaking right now for like the big 5 publishers. I know publishers are different. And within that division, you have a list of titles that you want to buy, you have certain tastes, you have a reputation for the imprint that you work for. And a lot of agents know what you're looking for. They know what the tastes are, which is also why I would recommend getting an agent. They just have those connections. And so a lot of the times in my inbox, I will receive a submission from an agent that I've met or like someone who thinks, oh, Denai, this will be perfect for Murky Books or perfect for Cornerstone Press. And then they'll send that pitch, they refine it. And from that moment, we get to decide whether or not it's going to work for us or not, if we want to go into it. There's different avenues as well, like we can end up in an auction where we're basically just trying to, appease the agent and the author and say, come with us. But it's also about like a chemistry match as well. I think it's always important to note that an editor will be working with you for at least 2 years. So you want someone who aligns with your vision in general, not someone who's simply going to publish you because you have a publishing deal. One of the key questions I tend to ask, because I meet all my authors before I sign them, one of the key questions I ask is, what is your definition of success, right? As you said, like not everyone shoots up to become the next Zadie Smith, right? But then I also love the fact that sometimes you can believe in a voice, and if you see more than one book in that person, then you advocate for it. An editor is also, to be quite honest, a project manager. So once the book has come through, it is our job to make sure that it moves through what we call a critical path, which tends to be about 2 years, with about a year. This is all rough, right? Because you're dealing with people, and people are complicated. But roughly, you've got 2 years, which will give the author the time to write, refine the manuscript, and then it will come through. And you will structurally edit it, right? So this is where you're just like taking a look at what's flowing, what's not. We also have line edits as well. This is where you're coming in. It all depends on the genre that you're working in as well. And then you go through like different stages. Publishers are different. So there's a different kind of editor called a managing editor. And they work on the specific details of the book, and sometimes they will work with the commissioning editor together. I prefer that as a model. It always helps to have someone who works with you. And from this point, you're moving through the critical path, right? The critical path being the book is going to be copy edited, and I am along for the entire
Sorry
journey.
to interrupt you, but it's probably just worth explaining that distinction, because I think most emerging writers think editing is copy editing. In other words, they think it's about making the corrections of spellings and punctuation, where the structural edits are the main work, aren't they, really? So do you want to just talk maybe about those distinctions?
Yeah. Okay, so the copy editor tends to be someone who's a freelancer, someone that we work with, and what they do is basically, they are like, if you think of your editor as someone who's good at grammar, a copy editor will shame them. And this has been my experience the majority of the time. Like, I feel like even when I've done a line edit and I'm like, oh, this is perfect, a copy editor will come in, they know the rules, and what they will also do is they will mark up a manuscript in a way that a typesetter understands it. So it starts off as a Word document, and then it has to be converted into a PDF, which is like a live file, and they will come in and they'll help you do that, depending on whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You know, the role can really differ when it comes to that. But a copy editor will come in and just make sure that they're checking for any inaccuracies, any things that maybe the editor has missed. They will come and just make sure that they fix that. So, for example, if you've ever received like what we call a proof copy, you know, like those books that say, oh, uncorrected version, that's because a copy editor is probably going through it or has gone through it, but it still needs to go through a proofread. So this is the other type of editor who will now come in once the files have been turned into PDF, and they will take a look at it and also just check for those spelling mistakes as well.
In terms of the role of the agent then and how you work with them, because I know with Murky Books, slightly different in the sense that you do accept submissions, don't you, from unagented, unrepresented writers. Roughly, what's the ratio of the kind of writers that you represent, that you work with, in terms of who is agented and who isn't?
Percentage is a bit of a difficult one. I think the reality is there is a lot to read. That is the truth. It's like my inbox right now just has submission after submission from agents, which is why for a publisher as big as Penguin, we tend to say we don't accept unsolicited submissions, but there are publishers that do. So I would like advise just looking at even independents and then seeing what that submission backlog looks like. On my end, it's a lot. So for Murky Books, this is why we only have one window, and that window is for the New Writers Prize. And you don't actually have to write a lot. We are buying into your potential. The writer of the New Writers Prize, of the Murky Book Writers Prize, has only written 5,000 words. And we are essentially saying we believe that there is something in this idea, there is something in you, and we're going to help you get that fiction book where it needs to be. But it's difficult to do that with everyone.
When's the window open?
The window's open right now.
Is it?
It is.
Until when?
26th of August, but don't quote me on that.
Okay.
It's towards the end of
August. Not that long, really, actually.
Not that long.
Just a few weeks.
And only 1,500 words to enter as well. That's all.
And you're working mainly with non-fiction writers at the moment, and you were talking about this new memoir, which sounds really interesting. In terms of the distinction, I mean, the obvious distinction between fiction and non-fiction is one's factual and one's not. But beyond that, in terms of from the publisher's perspective, how the book is sold and how it's kind of handled, really, what are the distinctions between non-fiction and fiction?
Well, the simplest one is to say that non-fiction has to be true to life, right? And then when it comes to fiction, you can also have different genres, and those genres will speak to the audience that the publisher is also trying to reach and that you're also hoping to reach as an author. I am a little bit controversial when it comes to this genre thing, because you know the thing that you're talking about, like the literary line that can exist in one commercial book and someone's like, take that out. I would say why? I think, to put it simply, when it comes to fiction, you can have, different genres. You can have commercial fiction, you can have literary fiction, and
But let's just break that down, though, because again, I think it'd be useful for the audience to know the distinction between commercial and literary fiction.
Yeah, I'm getting in it.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking commercial, you're thinking, okay, this is led by the plot. This is something that, is quite pacey. Readers are going to be going for it. It tends to be the kind of book that you would find, say, in Tesco. It tends to be like a crime thriller type space. It's even existing in romance and romantasy, but the main thing that's leading it is the plot. When it comes to literary fiction, which is, the hub that I work in, like the team that I'm in, it's about the writing quality. It can actually be a book where not much is taking place, but it's just taking you in because of the way that the writer has put it. We recently signed a book at Murky Books where in the acquisitions meeting, a publicist said, did he use a single full stop in it? But there's just something so fluid about the writing. It's even a bit more experimental as well. It doesn't have as much of a formula attached to it. And then it also changes the way that you publish the book. This is keeping to like really strict binaries, by the way. So the way that you publish the book tends to be quite different as well. If it's commercial fiction, you really want to make sure that those readers get it, like that element of suspense. You might like, emphasize the Kindle. You definitely make sure that you are in the spaces where those readers are. Whereas if it's literary fiction, as an example, you probably want to nominate it for a prize. You want your writer to write like a long think piece. It tends to be like really quite philosophical in the way that, that's written. You might even hear like a sample of it on BBC Radio 4, that kind of thing. And those writers are categorized in slightly different ways. For nonfiction, you still have those two binaries as well, but then it also depends on like what the list is producing. So if you think nonfiction, commercial stuff, that tends to be like, a celebrity book, but then it also depends on how it's written, right? So for example, if you've read Elliot Page's Page Boy, the way that's written, it reads like fiction, right? So that becomes literary memoir nonfiction. Whereas if you pick up, I only have Ramesh Ranganathan's book in my head right now, right? Like it tends to be a bit more like jokey, that can be a bit more like commercial, or it can also deal with like influencers in a certain space where you know that the audience is already there.
And I guess the other distinction is the big literary prizes are for literary fiction, not for commercial fiction.
Yeah.
Okay, we've been talking for nearly an hour, actually.
Have we?
Amazingly, yeah. So let's open up the floor to questions. I can't really see anyone, but I think we've got a roaming mic, have we? Have we got a roaming mic? We do now. So we have a question here in the middle with the yellow jacket.
Hi.
Hi.
So I have two questions that kind of feed into each other.
Okay.
Because my biggest anxieties with publishing, how would you best advise going about putting in your own marginalized voice into your stories? For example, me, I'm a biracial, disabled, queer person, so I really want to get that across in my stories. But I'm aware that publishing can have a lot of bias, and you don't want to water down the story, but people will be like, hey, water this down. And then I'm also aware, I myself as a writer, I want to publish lots of things, poetry, crime novels, as sort of variety. So how would you advise going about finding a publisher if you want to do lots of things, like you're not a writer who just sticks to one certain genre or style?
Okay, so two very good questions to start us off, thank you. And I guess you could all maybe answer them, but I think that second part of that question is really interesting, though, actually, because writers who don't stick to the same genre, from an agent's perspective, how much of that is a problem for you?
Again, it's down to the individual agent. I am an agent who represents adult fiction and non-fiction, and I also represent children's fiction. I don't do children's non-fiction, and I used to do poets, but I no longer, unless that poet is multidisciplinary, which means they will either eventually write a prose fiction or prose non-fiction. So to your first point, from an agent's perspective about the different identities you have, I actually don't think that will be so much as an issue for you in terms of all those different identities and that appearing in your novel. I would say, though, that if that is the extent and the scope of the story of the novel, you might find it difficult to break into the market, because I think as a society we have moved the conversation about identity, race, queerness, disability, whereas before it might be enough for that representation to be in fiction. That would have been exciting. I think we've moved beyond that now, and what I'd be looking for as an agent is just not that those are all there, which I think is great, and I love that diversity, but instead of that being the focal point, I would just still want an exciting fresh, contemporary story where the characters so happen to be disabled, so happen to be queer, so happen to be people of color. And I think that's where the industry is. And with the second part, in terms of wanting to do loads, I think that's actually really exciting. As an agent, I'd be like, money, like loads of avenues for you to sell into, but you just have to find an agent who knows how to do all of those things. And you actually don't have to find one agent who does all of those things. There are agents who share an author because one just does not want to deal with children's fiction because they can't, but they have a writer who does write children's as well as adult mystery or whatever, and so they agree that that author can find a children's author to deal with that. That happens as well, but again, it's doing your research, finding the right match, taking that time.
Because I guess, if you're with a big agency, you will find agents within that agency that represent probably all the different genres. But specifically, if the agent just specialises in, let's say, crime fiction, and then you write a romance story or literary fiction, they may not be the best person to represent you, but there may be somebody within a larger agency that would share the author. So it's not necessarily a huge problem, but it would depend on the agent and the specifics of that agent, wouldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. My first agency had a group, especially on the US side, had like 16 agents under the company. And I saw it all the time. That's what I think was really successful by the agency, is how those agents collaborated. There would be one who, again, would do a specific genre, but the author is writing, suddenly delivered a manuscript that's romance, but there's going to be a specialist romance agent in that agency. And depending on the agency, if they have that kind of relationship, they will just share you. It shouldn't make too much of a difference of impact on the writer. It actually affects the agents because they just have to figure out how they're paid for whatever deals they do. Yeah, but again, that's not every agency. So you're going to have to really find someone that's like bespoke to what you want to do.
In terms of representation and identity, we were talking earlier on, in fact, weren't we? Mm-hmm. You were the first South Asian crime writer, and also the first crime novel to be adapted, South Asian novel to be adapted for TV. To what extent have things moved on then? Because we're going back to, 2006, did you say?
6 years when I started. I
think, so 20 years almost, really. Yeah,
I think look, to go to the question, I think everything you said, let me be blunt, is your superpower, right? So when I first started, I didn't realize that my superpower was the fact that I was South Asian, the fact that I could write about an interfaith relationship, and the fact that I'm from Bradford. So the first part of it is your specificity, whether that's gender, whether that's disability, right, is your specific superpower to take a vast range of readers into your world. Now, that's the challenge. The specificity of what you've said is your USP, and we talk about USP, a unique selling point, right? Because nobody else can write that book, and they certainly won't write it as well as you did, and that's what I learned on my journey.
Yeah. So there you've got superpower. We've given you a superpower.
It's an absolute superpower, right? If you're South Asian, that's your superpower. Use it. If you're disabled, that's your superpower. Use it. Whatever you think is the thing that holds you back, you own it, and you nurture it, and you develop it, and then you share it with the world. The question is how to share it with a wide scope of people. Now, if you look at something like Richard Osman's book, which has gone viral, it's some old people in a care home that solve murders, right? Now, that is so small, specifically niche, right, on the surface. But then you go into the novel and it expands into the crime genre, and it's the best-selling book of the last year. So I think that whatever you think is whatever gives you that slight bit of anxiety that, I'm South Asian, I'm Muslim, I'm Hindu, I'm disabled, whatever it is that you think, how am I going to get into this market? It's about owning that space, but then looking at the market and thinking, how can I write the story that will engage a wide proportion of society? So when I did the crime thing, it was like, well, I'm going to write a crime novel. I kind of know how that goes. I know that there needs to be some kind of crime element to it. I'm going to call him Harry because I think Dirty Harry is kind of cool, kick-ass name. If I call him Hardeep, you might think of him differently, even though that's his name. I choose my names specifically so that they're relatively simple and straightforward, so that people can just get into the story. So I was very commercially minded.
I was going to say, that is a very commercially minded decision.
But none of that affected the fact that I'm still going to write about a Sikh detective married to a Muslim woman. I'm calling her Saima because it's quite an easy name to pronounce and to remember. So I was commercially aware to do that. But I think everybody needs to go away with understanding that whatever you think is niche is your USP, and if you have a USP, you are gold.
And I guess it's using that niche to say something universal about the human
Precisely.
experience, isn't it? And I think
Precisely.
the issue is if it's just reaching a very small audience, from an agent's point of view, from an editor's point of view, you need to have a certain volume for the business model to work. Don't I? So how do you feel about that, you know, in terms of selling the book? You know, how much is the niche a universal thing? How much have things moved on, I guess, in recent years?
You sound like you've got amazing ideas, right? So I think the main question that I would have is the medium in which you're going to communicate them, as opposed to being very overwhelming in terms of, okay, I want to do all these things. I want to write a poem. I want to do this, right? Like if you find the agent that knows how to operate in different mediums, I kind of move past niche, right? So one of the things that I love about my job is a book comes in, and this is the bit where we're like, okay, as editors, we respond to trends, but we also set the trends, right? Like we do that with agents as well. So it's how you write the story. I can honestly say the winner of the Murky Books Prize last year wrote a dystopian story, right? It's a genre that we all know about, but something about the voice, something about the way that he just picked up this character is something that we knew we believed in. And we've never published a book like that before, but we will. And we'll do it with a lot of energy. I think on one hand, yes, we can say it's beyond identity. Absolutely, it's beyond identity. It's how you write it, though.
Because, I mean, I guess Murky Books is different in the sense that it is specifically looking for marginalised voices, isn't it? Do you envisage a point in the future where that won't be necessary? Is that going to be something that, you know, in terms of we transitioning, or how do you see, you know, where we are now, really?
I absolutely hope that that doesn't happen, if that makes sense. I think there can be a lot of space for different types of publishing, right? Which is why we exist and other publishers exist, and they also have, you know, their own causes that they champion. But one of the things that I love about that brand of publishing is actually how community facing it is. I have seen so many people who are outside the barriers of publishing that we want to break down. So I guess if I am envisioning a future where that doesn't happen, it's one where more publishers are willing and daring to do that.
So there you've had a very fulsome answer to those two questions, and you've got a superpower as well. So another question. I think your hand up was first, and then yours, I think. So we'll do it in that order.
Hiya. A few times I heard you mention that when you're looking at a manuscript or a query, you're thinking about whether an author has got another book in them. And I just wondered what that means to you when you're looking. Is it something can be like a series, or is it somebody specifically told you they've got many other ideas, or what kind of things?
Yeah, from an agent's perspective, you're probably, unless the author states that in their query letter, you're probably going to have to ask them, you know, is this the only book that you plan to write? And, you know, depending on the agent, depending on what they want to do with it, that might be okay. But usually when I'm interested in a manuscript and I've got to a stage where I'm having a conversation with an author, I'm thinking about making an offer of representation. Part of that conversation, the chemistry test when you're interviewing each other, is one of my questions is going to be, what do you have planned for your literary career? What are your aspirations? What does success look like for you? Is it, you know, JQ levels of success, or is it something smaller? And then, you know, assessing whether I can do that for you. And again, I think most agents, because we're essentially salespeople, the more we sell, that's how we earn our money. So again, I think we'd be looking to work with writers who plan to have a career. I want to work with writers who are ambitious, who have big plans, and have the level of craft and patience to do that. But I don't necessarily think it's also like it has that much of a say in whether I do represent an author or not if the book in front of me is like really great, because as an agent, you get to represent that book forever if you sell it.
Because I guess if you think about it, some of the great novels have been written by writers who've only written one
Yep.
book.
I know.
Times have
Catching the
changed.
Rye, for example, or To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
But if someone came to you and they said, right, you never read anything by this writer, and they came to you and they said, this is the first novel in a series of 10, let's say. How would you feel about that? Is that a problem or is it an advantage if it's really good writing?
Well, it depends on the genre as well. Like, does it have the scope to maintain an audience's readership for 10 novels? That's about, like, how is it, like 20 years in publishing, right? Literally. And yeah, they'd have to show that they have that, but that can be done. It's done with police procedurals, the detective, it's case by case. It's done with, fantasy a lot, if the world is big enough, such as Harry Potter. It can be done with children's easily, literary fiction. Sometimes you can put out a sequel or a prequel. It just has to make sense. Yeah, is that actually correct for what you're trying to do, the story you're trying to sell?
I guess, it's about genre, isn't it? If you're a crime writer, in a way, there's an expectation that there will be, that
You'd hope
detective
so.
in other stories.
Yeah.
So the next question was from this woman here. If you can,
Hi. Oh, yeah. Hello.
Hi.
My name's Sally. So I've got two questions. First one is for Amit. When you got into TV, we talked about that you're writing the scripts, but actually, how did the BBC say yes to you? So that's the first question. And second question, advances, how are they structured? Because I think as sort of budding authors, certainly for me and my friends, we've got no idea what an advance looks like, what you can expect,
Yeah.
and is it a big chunk of money?
Well, it's
or is
a
it
lot less than it used to be, I'll
Is
tell
it?
you that. So that's the question for Amit, though. In the first part, I should say, the first question for Amit.
Yeah, so I think that the TV rights for the Verdi novels were competitive. So the minute something's competitive, it means you've got multiple people in the market, and it's a production company, because the BBC don't actually make content. What happens is you have they're the funders, they're the broadcaster. So there's lots of production companies. So the deal is actually done with the production company. So because it was competitive, and like I said earlier, there were no South Asian crime writers in terms of screen that you could really, there wasn't a Neil Cross or a Sally Wainwright who was brown. And because the Verdi books, I did feel that we needed a South Asian writer. It just so happened that if you're going to, like I said, if you're going to take a punt on somebody, take a punt on me. I've made a career out of breaking the rules. The other thing is I'm a huge fan of breaking the rules within reason. It has to be a reason for it. It has to be done at the right time. So I was disruptive in that way, that I was like, I've got this far and it's taken me 10 years and I won't quit, because that's the one thing I can't cope with in life, is quitting. I can fail forward, but I can't quit. And the difference between those is if you fail at something and stop, then you can count it as a failure. But if you fail at something and carry that forward into learning, then I just learned something. I'm going to move forward with that. So I kind of said this to the BBC, who was sceptical, and I did leave the project after 5 years because I had failed forward but not quite got it across the line. And I think that actually looking back, some of that was confidence in them because I was unknown. And in the interim, so I'd moved away from Verdi, had not succeeded in getting the green lights, and we'd got another screenwriter. Now, in that interim period, I wrote The Chemist as a screenplay. And I wrote it because I was angry, I was annoyed, not at them, at myself for not getting there. And I'm a big believer in energy, right? So the minute somebody says no to you, what happens is you get depressed, and I had a lot of that for 10 years. And I realized that this energy that I had, which was annoyance, aggression about the fact that I hadn't got there, I needed to move it into something positive. So the minute the BBC said no, I'm devastated. Now that will consume me completely. I will spend weeks, months, if not a year, being annoyed about that. So I simply just moved it into another project, which is The Chemist. I wrote that as a script, and I sold it, and the doors opened. So I think the other thing to say is if you fail forward with something and it doesn't quite work, in the interim period of time, you can simply use that to prove, A, that person wrong, that they should have said yes to you. You have to keep developing future pieces of work. Because then what happens is they get to know your name and they think, you know what, this guy's not going to go away. Like, he just keeps writing, he keeps knocking on the door. And that's the way that I did it. I would have loved to have been somebody that wrote a manuscript and had loads of agents fight. I got 66 rejections from agents. I realized that I wasn't going to be that person, but what I could be was the person that, okay, you know my name now because you rejected me. Actually, you rejected me a second time, so you definitely know my name. Actually, the third time, they're probably going to be like, do you know what? This guy keeps writing. He's not going to go away. Let's take a punt on him. I did it that way, as a war of attrition.
I mean, what I'm getting from that really is persistence, really. That's the important.
Persistence. Yeah, it's a long gig. It's a long gig, this. You know, just...
Now, the second part of the question, we could all probably talk about advances and how they've diminished sizably. But as a commissioning editor, you kind of making the offer, you're putting it on the table, aren't you? So how much have you got to play with? And how do you decide, okay, how much to set as an advance? Because in a way, you know, you could always say, well, it's an advance on sales. So from a writer's perspective, you know, it just means you don't get paid royalties for a lot longer, the bigger the advance. So there are pros and cons, I think, to advances. What do you think?
I think you're spot on that. So an advance is essentially an act of faith from the publisher. So say I give you 20 or 40,000 pounds, I put that on paper. That's because an editor will like take a book to an acquisitions meeting. This is like a weekly meeting we all have. If there are different projects and you're interested in publishing that person. And I'm speaking mostly for the company that I work for. It differs for some of them, but it's usually a collective decision where we're looking at the market to see where you will fit in and realistically how much money that we think we will make back against that act of faith, right? The best thing that you want is a bespoke but fair advance, right? Because if you think about having a writing career and we throw a lot of money at you and that book does not earn the advance back, then that just means that there's a loss on our end, right? It is a business at the end of the day. So it also depends on the genre that you're working on, right? Like say you've written something that is going to be a smash, we've never seen anything like it. Everybody's believing in it. They put a lot of money on the table. When I say everybody, I mean, you know, sales, they really do come in with like a lot of opinions depending on the advance that you give. The managing director also has an opinion, you know, like senior publishers, we all talk about it. And then it also depends on the likes of Carrie Ann, and the kind of auction that can come to the table, right? So if a book is a really big one and a lot of publishers are going for it, then on my end, then we also know that it's time for war. And sometimes a book can be inflated, which can also be good or bad, right? But I think the main answer here is bespoke but fair.
Yeah, because I guess it has to be enough to encourage the writer to think about writing another book as well. That's the other thing, isn't it? If you're wanting to work with them over a career. Yeah. You know, and I guess those six-figure advances that, you know, used to get headlines very much are unusual these days, you know. And I read somewhere, I think it was in the Bookseller, that was in Society of Authors magazine, that the average advance now is something like £5,000, which is a paltry sum, isn't it, if you think about the work that's gone into a book. From your perspective, from an agent's perspective, obviously it's your 15%, isn't it? You want that. In terms of a bidding war, that's kind of what you want, isn't it, really? You want publishers fighting over that thing, and then you can inflate the advance.
Yeah, exactly. But not all publishers have the ability to really participate against the big five. So the big five are Penguin, Macmillan, HarperCollins, Hachette, Simon & Schuster. These have been around for over 100 years. They have huge backlists. They have loads of celebrity, well, not celebrity, but like literary giants, and they are earning royalties upon royalties, and that's how their business stays afloat. And what they take on now, they want to obviously make their money back. So, but the big five, they have more money. They can offer into the 6, into the 7 figures. When you have independent houses, such as even bigger ones like Canongate, Faber, who else is quite a big independent?
It's Bloomsbury.
Bloomsbury is doing very well. I don't even think they should count as an independent anymore. They're doing very, very, very well. So they could potentially also compete. But when you have very small ones like very bespoke ones, the ones that are publishing the very, very character-led, experimental, formally inventive debut writers who, you know, are not writing a crime mystery or a fantasy that everyone's going to read. That really, really does, you know, some publishers can only offer like £500, £2,000. And having worked in an agency where I was seeing that had an office in the UK and an office in the US, and they worked together, I would see a like very, very large six-figure deal for a title that originated in the US and sold in the US. When they went to sell it in the UK, it could be like £5,000 to like £500,000 in the US. So it depends on who's auctioning, who you've sent to, and how much money they have. In terms of how the writer is paid, whatever the advance. So you'd say you did get a big five, and they got 100,000. You got an amazing six-figure £100,000 advance. Most, I think the payout structure is now in fours, because that's probably the safest for the publisher. So you'd get the £25,000 minus agent commission, tax, whatever, when you've signed the contract. Then when a few months later, or hopefully within the same year, if you want to keep your cash flow good as an agency and as the writer, you want to get the first half in the same year. So you want to work quite quickly on your edits so they're delivered. Once that's accepted by the publisher, which means it's going to go to print, you'll get the next £25,000. And then the next £25,000 comes a year later when the book is published in hardback, which is how most debuts are sold. And then usually, but not always, they then come out in paperback 6 months to a year, 18 months later, and then you get the final tranche of the advance. If you have sold your book for £500, you'd probably get all of that once. If it's like £2,000, you might get half year and the second half after you've sent it. And that's why writers now, they should really be thinking about how they can maximize that income by writing into the market. If you've written a book that's very local to the UK or very local to your region or whatever, it's probably not going to sell in France and Germany, which is a huge, huge, huge market and can really make your income. And then again, the book might sell for £500, but it's got huge potential film and TV. Again, you want an agent who will know how to exploit that. So you get an option deal and, get someone serious and to do treatments, sell it to a studio, then you get a purchase deal, and then things can really take off. But in terms of how publishers are coming up with their advances nowadays, no one's very happy because of the way that the market is, because these specific trends are working, because celebrities are writing more books. What's happening is that, especially the big five, editors are being told to allocate the largest advances for these books that when they're comp titles or something that's sold before, it's a celebrity who has a huge market. And then the trouble with that is that it leaves very, very little for debut writers or for a writer who's working on something quite niche, but that's also very important and that's like kind of ahead of its time. But how is that going to, reach an audience when it doesn't have, well, first, the writer can't really survive. And then, that comes down into, if you have a big advance from a publisher, again, that's a really big investment from them. So they're going to want to give it a large marketing and publicity budget as well, which really, really helps in selling the book. If you've got a small advance, you're probably not going to get that package. And so it's a really, really difficult time. And then when you break it down into working class writers, writers of colour, disabled writers, it can get even more sketchy into, who isn't being paid and who is being paid. And it's a huge problem in the industry, and it's much harder to be a career writer now. So even if you do get a really healthy advance, don't immediately quit your job.
Yeah. Can I just come in there? And the other thing to say is, what I didn't realise when I got published is, 99.99% of people who get published will have a job to start with. So let's just play fantasy book deals here, yeah? So let's say you get the dream six-figure £100,000 deal for one book, and it's normally for two books, so it's about 50 grand a book then. But let's say somebody offers you 100 grand for your one book. but you've got a job. So what happens is instantly, your agents can take 15%. Because you've got a job, you're instantly in the 40% tax bracket. So 40 plus 15 is 55%. So your £100,000 is now 45,000 in your pocket, because 55 is gone. So you are left with £45,000. Now, on the face of it, you think, oh man, these guys got a £100,000 book deal. But the reality is 55% of it went. Now, play it out into the fantasy league. You got £1 million book deal. Again, it's 55% has gone, so that's 450,000. So great, let's say, you buy a house, and look at house pricing these days. So you might get you buy your house and you're mortgage free, wonderful. What the hell are you going to live on? Right, because you spent it all. So even your £1 million book deal will not keep you going as long as you think it will, because 55% will go. And that's the other thing. It's the thing that I wish I had known, because you don't think about these things when you first get published. But the fact is, I have had a job as a full-time pharmacist up till 18 months ago. So everything it's different. You can open up a company, and that comes with its own headaches and tax and accountants and all that stuff. But ultimately, for me, I think that the reality is that a lot of us, most of us, will be working and have a job and do this as a side hustle and hope that it becomes something. I've been doing it since 2006, and I stopped working as a pharmacist 18 months ago. Not forever. I'm sure I will go back to it, just because it's a bit busy at the moment. But I think it's also a reality check that, there used to be a netbook agreement, there used to be a minimum pricing for books, there didn't used to be the internet. Now, everybody's competing against such tight things. And you can correct me here, but I think there was something like 22,000 books a month published across all platforms. It's tough. It's tough out there. So I think that write because you love it.
Yeah. So we've just got time for one more question, and it's this gentleman here. His hand up first. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Sean. Bit long-winded question, and I think you've answered parts of it already. I'm an ex-murder squad detective of 30 years, so all my writings are crime-related and true crime. I'm writing 2 books at the moment. I'm doing 2 scripts alongside them. One is historic serial offender set in Bradford. One is an historic child murderer in South Yorkshire. I take your point that if it's sort of local area, then it might not get the wider audiences. But the book set in Bradford, I'm writing at the moment, and I seem to be answering or telling the audience the end in the first chapter, because that's how it came about, the story came about. Is there any way I could change that, or would that come down to the editing and thinking about how to change around the sequence of events?
It's no longer a whodunit, it's a whydunit, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you think about Columbo, which went for years and years and years, you always saw who did it in the very first scene. So, but let's talk about it from an editor's point of view.
Can you rephrase the question?
So basically, he's written a crime novel, which in the first chapter you find out who's committed the crime. In terms of your role as an editor, would you encourage him to shift that back? Or could that be an advantage? Could it be a unique selling point? Could it be something you can market? Or
That is a difficult one for me to answer, to be honest, because it's also not a genre that I work in. So if it's okay.
So what I would do in that instance, this is just me as a crime writer, is you've told them the second chapter would be the element of doubt. The detective goes, well, you've told them this is the person that's murdered it. There's 2 ways of going. One is yours. Why didn't it? Why did they do that? I need to know why they did it. The second one is, I don't believe that they did it. And you go all the way through the book. And then the audience are always just like, did they, didn't they, did they, didn't they? You can generate pace that way. You get questions. You get drama because it's did they, didn't they? So I think that's the 2 ways to solve it. If it is absolutely, Joe Bloggs killed him in chapter 1, well, then why did Joe Bloggs kill him? Because Joe Bloggs wasn't a killer. He was never a killer. He should never have been a killer. I don't understand why he did that. And then you've got elements of doubt. Well, if I don't believe that he could have done that, why did he do it? Do you know what I mean? So I love twists, me. So I would go throughout the journey. And then at the end of the chapter, the audience has read it all thinking, why did he do it? Did he do it? Did he do it? And then if he did say he did it, it's almost a twist because the audience didn't believe that he did it. But then if you do manage to find it was the wife, it was the son, it was the this, that, and the other, then you have your twist and everyone's satisfied. So I don't think it's really a problem. I think it's how you take that and then think to yourselves, how can I make this a thriller now? So why did he do it? How did he do it? Or did he do it?
Yeah, brilliant.
Is how I would do that. And just off the top of my head.
Great
When you
answer. I
first
mean,
said
I've just finished a Muriel Spark novel called The Driver's Seat, which starts off by saying the protagonist in 24 hours will be dead. She'll be tied, her wrists and ankles will be tied, and it describes the crime scene. And it's the most gripping way to start the book, because you're just thinking, what on earth can happen in 24 hours? She's going on a holiday in that first chapter. You know, she's buying some clothes to go on the beach, you know, and then so in a way, it's the propulsive kind of inciting incident which drives the narrative. So I think it's exactly how you do it, really. And I guess that's the theme, really. It's how good the writing is at the end of the day, isn't it? You know, whether it's a niche market, whether it's you know, you're doing something different with the genre. If the writing is good enough, that's what will carry it through, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, it's exactly 12 o'clock, so we'll go on then. This will be quick.
Just hit me quickly there.
Yeah.
What sort of a reader am I? What sort of a reader am I? I've just read 30 Lee Childs books about the character Jack Reacher,
Yeah.
and I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah.
But I've also read Jeffrey Archer's Prison Diaries trilogy, and that's fascinating.
Yeah.
What does that make me as a reader?
We're not going to psychoanalyse you, I don't think.
Just a great reader.
Yeah, and
Just
a
a great
loyal
read.
one.
Yeah, just a great reader. I mean,
Yeah.
I write crime, but I love comedy. One of the best books I've read in the past 10 years was Eleanor Oliphant. I thought was
Yeah.
just absolutely remarkable. I mean, it's not crime fiction, but God, I'll never forget that book as long as I live. So, you know, it's great. You're just a reader. You love reading. Don't need to be specific about it.
We have run out of time, but we are going to be hanging around to network. So
Yeah.
if you've got questions, just come and grab us, come and ask us. I just want to say thank you to you all for coming and giving your time on this Sunday morning, to thank the panellists for their expertise and their time, to thank Penguin Random House and the City of Culture for hosting this event, and ask for your applause, really. So thank you.
I've got a hard out at 12:30, so if anybody wants to come and ask me something, then
Grab him quick.
grab me quickly.
Go first.